So we were at another scene we had been called to late that night, and I knew something was wrong when the officers at that scene sped off to another one down the road, and that was the scene that Officer Billa had been shot. The second we got there, I saw the ambulance, and I saw what I thought was an MPD officer being loaded into an ambulance, and I had no idea what was going on. I was assuming that an officer had been shot, but we had no idea what the circumstances were. I just knew that a lot of chaos had ensued in about 10 seconds, and I heard the officers' radios going crazy. Then we got there and we kind of pulled off on the side of the road, and that road had already looked like a parking lot with all the cop cars that were there, and more kept showing up. They got out of their cars with guns and started running in one direction. And so I didn't want to get out of the car. It was late. I didn't know, really where we were, because I couldn't see where we were. And so the first thing I did was call our executive producer and tell him, I think something bad really happened, and I think we're going to need pretty much everybody back at the station right now because something bad has definitely happened. I could feel it. I could feel the danger. I could feel, it was in the air, and it's really hard to explain. There was a lot of fear. I think there were some people that had kind of come out of their homes and come out of businesses looking around. And I remember looking at my photographer saying, I think we're going to be here all night. And we were, it was really scary for the first few hours, actually, because MPD was doing their best with the situation, and that made it to where they couldn't tell us what was going on. And so we were really just having to get information from what we could see, which wasn't much. They had blocked things off, but I remember the SWAT teams coming, not knowing what was going on. And I think the most alarming part of that night was seeing, I didn't know it was him at the time, obviously, but seeing Officer Billa get loaded into the ambulance and hoping that he was going to make it. I had no idea what had happened or where he'd been shot. So we got out of the car, we started trying to figure out what was going on, and we were in the way. We were in the way of what the officers were doing, but we couldn't get out of the way because so many officers had parked behind us, and so we were stuck, and we were now in this story. We were now a part of this story because we got there so quickly, because we were at that other scene, which was maybe 10 minutes down the road. I remember feeling the sense of urgency. I remember feeling scared, terrified, and I don't usually feel like that when I go to scenes, because it's usually secure, the police are there, they're able to answer questions, but no one knew what was going on, and it was hard. It was hard to keep it together because I'm a news reporter, but I'm also a human being, and a lot of me wanted to leave, but I knew that I had a service to the community to tell them what had happened to someone in the community who had died, but also an MPD officer who had, what we later found out, who had died, and that those scenes were connected. I knew I had a duty to the Mobile community to figure it out. I knew that we had to stay all night, however long it took to get our answers, and we were there till about 5 in the morning, and we'd gotten there about 11:45, close to midnight. So I will never forget that. And then when we learned hours later that Officer Billa didn't make it, I had that feeling because I could see it in the officers' faces that were on scene and that were securing the scene. They knew, and they didn't tell us, but they didn't really have to, because I could see it in their faces. So I woke up the next day and realized that not only was my duty the night before to tell that story, but now we had a lot of work to do as a news station, being committed to our community, that we needed to give as much praise as we could to Officer Billa. So I really didn't know what the next day was going to look like, or really what the next 2 weeks were going to look like. And I was chosen because of that night. I was chosen to ride in the processional where Officer Billa's body was taken to Memorial Gardens, and then also the processional for his funeral. So the first one was difficult, really difficult for me. I remember getting choked up on air. It was hard because for me, that was the first time I'd ever seen our community come together around one person and one family wholeheartedly in the entire community. So I didn't really have any expectations. I had never been to something like that before. And so when we were in the Fox 10 truck in the back, and we had a camera up high so I could see kind of far out, and I started seeing just people were stopping their cars and lining the streets, and they had American flags and they were waving and they had their hands over their hearts and they had signs that said thank you. And I remember being on air and I remember getting choked up and I started crying because it was really, really hard to see our entire community heartbroken for one person, because it just made everybody human, and it made everybody stop for a second and say, what do these officers do day in and day out? And everybody was thinking about Officer Billa's son and his wife, and there really was a community that rallied around him. And I had never seen that, where, you know, we've done stories before where people rally around a community and rally around a family, but I had never seen it to that magnitude, where people were stopping their cars on the way to wherever they were to honor Officer Billa as he went by on the way to Memorial Gardens. So, that was hard, because again, I had a duty to our viewers to tell this story, and I wanted to explain everything that I was seeing because it was powerful, and I wanted to use as many words as I could and be as descriptive as possible to tell that story. And I found myself right there with all those people lining the streets saying thank you to Officer Billa, because it was just a moment for the community to stop and think about life and how fragile it is, and to think about the dedication that our officers have to our community. Again, I'd never felt that before, and again, I have a hard time explaining that feeling, and I kind of have chills again, because there were at points there were no words to describe what I was seeing. There were so many people, and there were so many signs, and people were in tears, and I just felt like, and I wanted to say it all, but then I found myself not even to speak on air. And I remember, you know, Bob and Lenise having to take over a couple times because they could tell I was choked up. I mean, this was the first story that's ever made me do that, and it's because just the images were so powerful. And Officer Billa was absolutely honored that day. And then, of course, for his funeral procession, I had that. Now that I had the experience at the first one, I kind of knew what to expect, but I still got choked up. I remember, I don't remember what school it was, but I remember driving by a school, and it was an elementary school, and all these little kids were lined on both sides of the street, and they had all these signs and American flags. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, these kids are being exposed to this. They are part of this too. And it just broke my heart all over again, because they were paying their respects, and just something about kids honoring him and seeing that image just was also really, really powerful that whole day. And I think the hardest part of the funeral procession was when they called Officer Billa's numbers over the radio for the last time. And the dispatcher said that we've got it from here. And I broke down in that Fox 10 News truck. I remember that. I broke down because it hit me, and it became real right then, that Officer Billa was never going to patrol our streets again. And we had learned a little more about him at that point. And I know that was emotional for our anchors to hear, because I remember hearing, I can listen to the show in my ear, and I remember hearing that they were also getting choked up. And I don't think there's been anything that's brought our community together in so much solidarity than that. And unfortunately, we saw that because an officer died. I wish that we could see more of that every day when something happens in our community, but I remember seeing it for the first time and really having it set in that day, and his numbers being called over the radio was the hardest part. That part was even harder than the funeral, I think. But at the funeral, I was able to attend just as a person, not as a news reporter. I went to work after the funeral. I remember hugging Aaron Billa, and that meant a lot to me because I felt so connected to the story, and I wanted to pay my respects and talk to a lot of officers there too, and tell them how sorry I am and things like that. So yeah, when the dispatch came over the radio and we heard it, and I heard it in my ear because we played it on the show, that was the moment that we were going under the American flag. And just all of that combined was, emotional's not strong enough of a word, but it was really powerful. It was almost overwhelming.
But for me, I just remember waking up that morning and I had all the push alerts from Fox 10, from the app, saying what had happened. And it started off as a homicide investigation, and then all of a sudden that turned into a double homicide with an officer involved. And I just remember throughout the day, every single new detail just was more and more heartbreaking. You found out, it was Officer Justin Billa. You found out how young he was, and then those photos started circulating on social media with him and Aaron, his wife, and his little 1-year-old son, and your heart just broke for them. And I couldn't even imagine what they were going through. And us being in the news business, it was our job to cover it. And I remember just almost being on an adrenaline rush that day, trying to find out what happened, trying to find out more details. The little DJ, today is actually his birthday. And I remember when I interviewed him and his parents, they said it was, it's a crazy coincidence that the day he died, was also his birthday, and that he touched this little boy so much. But basically, going back to the beginning, I saw little DJ's photo on social media, and he had been watching, him and his parents were watching Fox 10's coverage of the funeral. And every time the photo of Officer Justin Billa came up full screen on the TV, his mom noticed that DJ would stop and say a prayer for him. And he felt so bad for Officer Justin Billa. He looked up to him because he loved police officers. So his mom actually snapped a photo of him praying for Officer Justin Billa when his photo was on the screen. And DJ had a little policeman outfit that he loved to wear. And I just remember seeing that photo on social media, and it just kind of captured my heart. It was just so sweet. So I reached out to the mom, LaWanna Rogers, to see if she would be interested in, speaking with me about this, because as tragic as the story was, it's just so heartwarming to see, someone doing this, just something positive coming out of it. So I reached out to her, and she agreed to do an interview with us, and we drove out to Jackson, where he lived, and met him in person. And he's just so sweet. He had his little police uniform on, and just talked to him about it. And he was so young that you could tell that he didn't really grasp 100% what happened, but he was looking at it through the mind of a child, just how he looked up to him and how he wanted to pray for him, and he wanted to pray for his family. And that is really what just touched me. And you saw him at the end. He did his little salute at the end for Officer Justin Billa and his family, and said, you guys are in my prayers. And I did that story, and then it got a lot of, traction on social media. And about a couple weeks later, someone from the Mobile Police Department reached out to me saying that, DJ touched their hearts too, seeing that story, and they really wanted to meet him. They wanted to do something special for him, and they invited us to go along. And that was when I actually met Aaron Billa for the first time. She came along with us, her and her son Taylor, and a couple of officers from the Mobile Police Department. And the chief from Jackson, the police chief from Jackson, came with us. And we all met up with little DJ and got to see him surprised by the gifts they gave him. They gave him that little police car that he could drive in, and his face just lit up as soon as we got out of the car. And we just spent a couple hours, just the family talking with the officers, DJ's mom connecting with Aaron Billa, and DJ got to ride in the car with Taylor. And it was just amazing to see that just these people, they were complete strangers hour before this. Sorry. They were, hold on, the wind, but it was, I know it is. But it was amazing to see that all these people in this group that we were part of, they were complete strangers just hours before, but they all came together, you know, in honor of Justin Villa. And it really was beautiful to see that happen. And ever since then, Aaron and Lawana Rogers, they both have told me that they've stayed in touch since. DJ and Taylor have played together a couple of times since. I even saw today a couple of the police officers who went with us on that trip are posting for DJ's birthday today. So just complete friendships formed, special relationships, and you know, I'm glad that they all came together. It's heartbreaking how it happened, but it was just amazing to see so many people from so many different walks of life come together to honor this man who inspired more people than he ever knew. I mean, I interviewed her a couple times. The first time was when we met up with her to go see DJ. But yeah, I mean, it was heartbreaking. But to be honest, her strength really, really surprised me. I mean, I knew and had heard from other people that she was an amazing woman, but to meet her in person and to hear her talk, just her strength just amazed me. I mean, obviously, you know, she was heartbroken and sad, but she really wanted to focus on his life bringing positivity to other people, that he didn't just die for nothing, that his message will be spread not only on the Gulf Coast, but I mean across the nation and across the world. And she started this amazing foundation. And I saw the Villa Bears have come out now, and she's really doing a lot of amazing things. So it was like little DJ inspired by Justin Villa. She wanted to bring that to so many other people. And I think she's doing an amazing job so far. The whole month of February, I've been thinking about it. Just, you know, anticipating the 1 year mark of, you know, it was such a sad day. We've covered so many stories in this business. We see people on the happiest days of their lives, and we see people on the most tragic days of their lives, and it's not an easy job to do. And I just remember that was one of those stories I covered in Mobile where you just felt the whole city stand still. Everyone was talking about it. I remember going out to dinner and getting into conversations with complete strangers sitting next to us because they were talking about it. And you saw the city light up in blue. And it just, I mean, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it right now, because it was just amazing to see the whole city stop and just take a moment to reflect and honor this man. It's at several different points. They did it for the processional, they did it for the funeral, and it's definitely one of those stories that will always stick with me. I messaged Erin today, you know, just letting her know that I'm thinking of her and Taylor from Florida, and you know, it's definitely one of those stories I think about all the time. It's very hard to believe that it's been a year. You know, in some ways it feels like it just happened yesterday, but in other ways it feels like it has been a year. So I don't know. I really hope that it looks like Aaron and Taylor are doing well. And, you know, I really hope that as the years go by that he's not forgotten. And I don't think he will be, because Erin's doing a great job with her foundation. But I just hope as the years go by, people really reflect on this and, you know, hug their loved ones a little bit tighter. As cliche as that sounds, it made me just kind of realize how quick a death can happen.